Good evening. I think I should pour a glass of water before I start. Now is the time to pause it and maybe take a break because the pouring might have made some liquids flow. Tonight I'm going to start do some Canadian. I've been planning to do some more Canadian whiskey as time goes on, and I've packed up quite a stockpile of it. And I just was at the whiskey festival last week, and they had some great Canadian whiskey there, and I think I've got most of it here. So as the months go on, I'll be doing some of those. Maybe a few 18-year-old things that I didn't get to in 2018. First of all, I have here a Crown Royal. Yeah, I know, you're going to say, boo, hiss, Crown Royal. But, you know, it's popular in the southern states. People drink this stuff a lot, particularly down in Texas. It's popular stuff. This one here is the Crown Royal Bourbon Mash. So what does that mean? That means it's probably 51% or more corn, some rye, maybe some wheat, and maybe some malted barley. And that's all it means. So bourbon mash doesn't necessarily mean it's going to taste like a bourbon. It being a Canadian whiskey, I suspect that it was aged in used barrels. So yeah, it probably was aged in ex-bourbon, but how old were they? I don't know. How many times had they been filled? I don't know. So it's not going to necessarily taste like a bourbon. I don't think it will anyway. This is only my guess. I haven't tried this before. I was at the whiskey festival, but if there was a bottle that I already had, I wasn't going to try it because I already have the bottle. And let's get a Glencairn out of here. Okay. So now I'm going to open this, get past the plastic wrap here. Apparently in the United States they call it something other than bourbon mash. I think they changed the name of it. Not sure what they call it down there now, but it's still the bourbon mash here in Canada, and it's still for sale as the bourbon mash Crown Royal. It has this plastic wrap on there. I think I've got the plastic wrap. The plastic seal wrap. I got this pretty much as soon as it hit the shelves last year, and this was 21st of April in 2018, and it cost me $36.99 plus, of course, 10% liquor tax, so another $3.70 and another $1.50 and 35, another $1.85 for goods and services tax, and then of course the 10-cent bottle deposit. So yeah, just over 40 bucks Canadian, that is. Well, there's not much to pop here. It's this cheap plastic cap, although I think the color is darker than the typical gold of your regular Crown Royal cap. Cheap plastic cap, but it keeps things sealed up. So, pour a little dram. What does it say on the label here? It says, actually I might as well show you that label once again here. Crown Royal Bourbon Mash. Bourbon Mash, Mout de Bourbon, 750 mils and 40% alcohol by volume. It's called the Blenders Series, blended Canadian whiskey. So it's probably a blend of corn and wheat and rye. What does it say on here? Crown Royal Bourbon Mash is a blended Canadian whiskey made with a bourbon mash bill that showcases the warm vanilla and subtle oaky notes of our bourbon mash whiskeys. Among the most flavorful and complex of the 5 unique whiskeys that comprise the extraordinary Crown Royal Signature Blend. Ah. So it doesn't say much. Doesn't have a lot of information on there. This is Crown Royal. It's made in Gimli, Manitoba by the distillery that was once one of Seagram's distilleries up in Gimli. Oh. It does have a nice aroma to it. Right away I'm getting some rye. Some of that sort of dill, sort of mint thing. The same kind of nose that you would get out of a bourbon, or similar. And I'm guessing it's 51% corn if it's a bourbon mash. There's some sweetness too. I'm getting sweetness from the corn. I don't know if there's wheat in here and or malted barley. There's probably some malted barley. Can't say how much. Mostly what I'm getting is rye. Rye on the nose and corn. And it does smell a bit like a bourbon to me. Once again, I wonder what kind of barrels they used to age this. There's that dill note again, and a little bit of mint, corn sweetness. It's like olives and pickles. I'm getting some of that olive juice note as well. Quite pleasant, but it's at 40%, so it's a little bit toned down. A little more naturally would give it more of a nose. I will try putting some water in there after I've tasted it neat and see what that does. How are we in the leg department? They run down pretty fast. They just run right down. They're not sticking very hard. But at 40%, what do you expect? Let's see now. Maybe get a little bit more light on me. Just a little bit. There we are. Interesting nose. Let's see what it tastes like. To me, it has a lot of the characteristics of a bourbon. I'm getting sweetness from the corn. Sweetness from the corn, a little bit of rye, like a rye bread. On the nose, I'm still getting a lot of that dill, some dill and mint. Oddly enough, I'm not getting a lot of caramel. A little bit of caramel, a little bit of vanilla. It reminds me of a 40% bourbon, but the flavor is not as strong and in your face as a bourbon. Bourbon is a strong flavor usually and sweet. This tastes like a bourbon that's been toned down somewhat. Probably because it's been aged in used barrels. And I'm guessing that just from it, it would have a much more caramel and much more vanilla if it was aged in virgin American oak. It could have something else added to it because of that 9% rule. I don't know. It's soft. Soft. There's caramel and vanilla in there, but it's hiding. It's underneath this coating of rye flavors of dill and mint, or should I say the rye reminds me of dill and mint. I'm going to put a little bit of water. I forgot my spoon, okay? I'm going to put a few drops of water in here. And one more. Okay. A few drops of water because I forgot my spoon. I shouldn't really have to put much water in here because it is at 40%, but we'll see what happens because this might bring out some more of the caramel and vanilla and tone down the rye a little bit. See what happens when we do that. Okay. The rye on the nose is toned down somewhat. Quite a bit, actually. I'm still getting a lot of that sweetness. But the rye notes are turned down. Another sip of water. Okay. I'll make sure I bring a spoon for the next video. Sweetness and rye. A little bit of that rye, dill, and minty note, but it's more muddy than it was before I put the water in. I'm getting a little more caramel and vanilla than I did before I added the water. And the rye is a little softer, but it's still coating the mouth on all sides. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's a lot softer. I'm getting a lot more of the caramel and vanilla just on the tip of the tongue and on the surface of the tongue. And coating the mouth on all sides is the rye. So the rye and the on the nose, I still get a lot of rye. It's all right. It's not exactly blowing my doors off, but it's all right. There is some bitterness too on the finish, which is not bitterness. Now I'm getting more caramel and vanilla, but the rye is ever present. And now on the finish, like I said, there is a bit of bitterness creeping in. It's different. It's somewhere between a bourbon and a Canadian whiskey. But a bourbon would have stronger flavors from the virgin American oak casks that they use. This, I don't know what casks they use, probably used. And there's a stamp here. Crown Royal Distilling Company. And there's some fine print. It's like a little stamp down here on the bottom. Oh, it even has bottle number. 18,329. Yeah, that's a special one, all right. 18,329. Yeah, they put a lot of this out at that time. March, April of last year. It was all over the place. And I don't know, it's missing something. It smells like bourbon. It tastes a bit like a bourbon, but more like halfway between a bourbon and a Canadian whiskey. I'm going to give this some more time. I'm going to let it open up a little bit and see if it improves. So far it's okay. It's not great. But it's not absolutely terrible either. So for your $40, you can get whiskey that I prefer, Canadian whiskey that I prefer over this for less money. I think that's all there is to say. I will drink to your very good health. Cheers.
Food Quig.
Food Quig.
Food Quig.
Food Quig.
Food Quig.
Yeah.